Good morning. Everybody getting thawed out a little bit. We've had a couple of nice cool days. All right, we're going to very ambitious lesson again this morning. We're going to look at Joseph and Esther and Providence, how God worked with them, which each of them could be about Abraham, and then we'll get into Joseph and Esther. Abraham was the father of many nations. His faith had been an example for every generation that followed him and is a faith that all Christians should strive to attain. Genesis 22:10 through 13, Abraham is poised, knife raised, ready to offer Isaac as commanded by God, and God stops him. Genesis 22:12, and he said, "Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." A ram was provided by God for the sacrifice. Abraham had passed the test of faith. And like we talked about last week, this was God's way of testing Abraham. The things that Abraham had done before, God said, "Get up, go," and he did. He moved. But that could have been because he wanted to. That could have been something that Abraham had desired. But this test, God asked him for his one and only son as a sacrifice. And the parallels to that, of course, go back to God and Christ and how God felt for Christ. It's a lot of times we don't stop and think, but God gave up Christ. Just as he asked Abraham here to test Abraham's faith. Abraham is standing there and God says, "Your only son, the son you love." Isaac was the son of promise. God had promised through Isaac that all of these covenant promises would be fulfilled. And Abraham had enough faith to know that God would fulfill those through Isaac, even if it meant bringing him back from the dead. And he was ready to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. Genesis 22:14, and Abraham called the name of the place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, "In the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." The original name for Jerusalem was Salem. Genesis 14:18, then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of the God Most High. Psalm 76:2, in Salem also his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion. The term used by Abraham for God will provide, is Jehovah Jireh or Yahweh Yireh. Thus, Yireh Salem, Jerusalem, the mount of God where it will be provided. And it's been known since that day. Remind of the fact that where Isaac was offered was on the mount where Christ was sacrificed. God guided Abraham to this very spot, this same location, to offer Isaac. And then hundreds of years later, Christ would be led down a path to the same area and crucified and offered. The symbolism is there. Abraham had the faith to offer Isaac. God had the love for us to offer Christ. The angel of the Lord, Genesis 22 and 15, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. And your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Abraham is called the father of all those who believe, Romans 4:11, that he might be the father of all those who believe, that righteousness might be imputed to them also, or the father of the faithful. Abraham's willingness to relinquish Isaac expresses his dependence on the Lord himself, not just on the divine promise alone. Abraham recognizes his son Isaac as a gift ultimately belonging to God, and the fulfillment of the Lord's covenant promise as a privilege, not a right. Too many times people think that we are owed something, that God owes it to us. God owes us a good life. God owes us the promise of heaven. God owes us. God doesn't owe us anything. We are sinful, rebellious creatures. And he has offered us a way to get past that by the sacrifice of Christ and burial of baptism into Christ. But Abraham realized that the promises that were made, that Isaac was truly just a gift that he had control of for a while, that God had given him. And if God wanted to take it back, he was God's to do that. God leads Abraham to the point of offering to God everything he possesses, so that he hopes in God alone, only to receive back, sanctified and blessed, what he has offered. Mark 8 and 35, for whosoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. Abraham knew God would provide. We have the same promise. We just need the faith of Abraham. Jehovah Jireh, God will provide. Matthew 6 and 33, but seek first the kingdom of God, his righteousness, all these things shall be added to you. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. And my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:19. The faith that Abraham had was because he understood that everything he had, everything he was, he owed to God. God had supplied everything. And if God could supply it, God could take it away. We have to realize today that what we have has been given to us to use in this lifetime. It's been given to us by God. And it's been given to us so that we can survive in this existence, but not only that, we can use it to further the spread of the gospel. We can spread Christ and him crucified and salvation through him to all mankind. No, we can't go out in all the world ourselves, but we can affect the people around us. We can influence the people that we have influence over. We just have to have the faith and understanding. That's what we owe God. Okay, any comments on that before we move on? All right, two characters that we read about, Joseph and Esther. And we can actually see the providence of God at work. Joseph, God's providence is quite evident in the lives of Joseph and Esther. In their particular times in history, both played important parts in God's plan for his people, fulfilling his promise of a Messiah for all mankind. They lived at different times. They were faced with different situations. And yet, what it came down to is their actions would save Israel, the nation of Israel. And they found themselves in the position to do that because of the providence of God. God's plan was going to go forward regardless of who tried to stop it. And he would always have certain people or certain things in place to overcome those that tried to stop things, those that tried to impede his plan. Joseph, the story of Joseph has drawn the deepest in our readers for 3,000 years and will continue to appeal to readers until the end of time. Joseph's story occupies a larger space in the Old Testament than any other personal narrative except that of Abraham. Our study today will focus on the providence of God and Joseph's journey from shepherd to ruler in Egypt, which enables him to save his family from famine and establish them as the nation of Israel. Everybody knows the story of Joseph. We've heard it ever since we were first started classes in Sunday school. There's a great deal of information here in Joseph. Things that we don't look at is how Joseph felt at the end when he meets his brothers and stuff. The emotions he's dealing with, the rejection and the hurt that he has to deal with, the things that he does to try and gain Benjamin and let the others go. These were all tests for the rest of his family to see how they felt. He would learn things in dealing with them that would allow him to accept them back. And God has used him and placed him so that he will be ready to save his family and the nation of Israel. Genesis 45:5. Excuse me. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who were sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh and the Lord of all of his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. This, of course, is at the when Joseph has revealed himself to his brothers, and he is pleading with them to go back and get their father and all of their relatives and come back to Egypt. So the next 5 years they'll be taken care of. He has come to the realization that God has used him and placed him at this point in his life so that he can save all of his kinfolk, that he can make it possible for the nation of Israel to grow and be strong and become that nation God had promised. Now, when we look back at his life, we can see the highs and the lows that Joseph went through and suffered through to bring him to this point. Excuse me. Genesis 37:3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Joseph found favor from Jacob. And the other brothers, the older brothers, all despised him for it. They were jealous. So that jealousy would grow into almost a hatred and cause the demise of Joseph and the selling of him into slavery. Another thing that added to the problem was Joseph's dreams. The only time we see God touching Joseph in this story with a miraculous power is that Joseph could interpret dreams. He was given the ability to interpret dreams. Genesis 37:5. Now Joseph had a dream. He told it to his brothers. They hated him even more. Joseph's sheaves of wheat stand while his brothers bow down. Genesis 37:8. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Joseph's second dream involved the sun, moon, and stars bowing down to him. Jacob scolded him and questioned the inference that he and all his family would bow down to him. Genesis 37:11, and his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. God's miraculous power seen the ability of Joseph to interpret dreams. This appears to be the only evidence of miraculous power being used. The remainder of Joseph's life will be guided by God's providential hand. Joseph is sold into slavery. Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers. Their hatred for Joseph boils to the top. Genesis 37:23. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. God's providence uses the evil of Joseph's brothers to place Joseph in Egypt. If he had not come to the brothers, if they had not hated him so much and plotted to kill him and put him in the pit, if Judah had not said, wait, had not seen the caravan of traders coming down the path, he said to his brothers, let's not have his blood on our hands. He is our kin. They sold him into slavery. And if they had not done that, we don't know where Joseph would have ended up. But because they did, he ends up in Egypt. Joseph in Potiphar's house, Genesis 39:1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did proper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. 39:5. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house, all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Joseph had faith in God. Joseph was a young man, lost, been sold into slavery. He ended up in the house of a ruler in Egypt. And Joseph had committed himself to be the best he could be in whatever circumstance he found himself. Too many times people go through hard times and they wallow in self-pity. Oh, woe is me. Why did that happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? Look at the people around me. They're not suffering like this. Joseph didn't do that. Joseph was going to be the best that he could be wherever he was. So he impressed Potiphar. He impressed him so much that Potiphar gave him control of all he had over his whole household. And God blessed whatever Joseph touched. God was looking after Joseph because Joseph was going to be more than just a slave. We find Potiphar's wife became a serious temptation. Genesis 39:7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Joseph maintains his integrity and his commitment to God. His circumstances are about to change. He will come in contact with men that will change his life yet again. Here he is, falsely accused, tempted, because he has control of the house. And this was not a one-time thing. Potiphar's wife had been after him for some time, but he refused because he would not commit that sin against God. He was committed to being the best he could be. Genesis 39:19. So it was, when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him. Whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Again, Joseph goes from being over the household of Potiphar to being a slave in prison. And yet, his honesty and his ability shows through till the jailer puts him over the jail. He's in charge of the prisoners. God's providence, Joseph's attitude and faith see his situation flourish even in prison. The gift of dreams will again set the stage for later incidents and actions to move Joseph into position to fulfill God's plan. Genesis 40:5. Then the butler, the baker, the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream. Both of them, each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with his own interpretation. And Joseph came into them in the morning, looked at them, and saw they were sad. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his Lord's house, saying, why do you look so sad today? And they said to him, we each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. So Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. The butler's dream will result in him being returned to Pharaoh's service. The baker's dream will see him hanged by Pharaoh, and the birds will devour his body. Joseph will plead with the butler to remember him when he returns to his position. Excuse me. so he may be freed from his unjust imprisonment. Excuse me. Joseph, he deals with where he's at, but he wonders why he's in prison. Why was he unjustly accused? He has tried to do his best, but here I am stuck in prison, forgotten. Am I going to be here the rest of my days? The butler is going to be reinstated, and Joseph asked him, don't forget me. Help me get away from this imprisonment. Genesis 40:23. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Joseph remains in prison. From man's point of view, will never rise above the position of being a forgotten slave in Egypt. A foreign slave in Egypt. Again, we see God's providence at work. You've got a young man that started as a shepherd in Canaan. He was sold into slavery, and he became a foreign slave in Egypt. He rose to control Potiphar's house. And then, because he was falsely accused, he was thrown in prison. A slave in prison. How much lower can you get? And he is just hoping to get a release from prison. He has no idea what's in store for him and what's to come. Genesis 41:1. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Pharaoh's dream consisted of 7 fat cows and 7 lean cows, and the lean cows would devour the fat cows, and 7 healthy, full sheaves of grain that would be devoured by blighted, damaged sheaves of grain. 41:8. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. He sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told him his dreams. But there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. An opportunity appears for a lowly foreign slave locked away in Egyptian prison. The butler remembers. Genesis 41:9. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. He shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. God gave Joseph the answer to Pharaoh's dreams. He told Pharaoh there would be 7 years of famine, 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of famine. He told Pharaoh how it should be handled, to appoint someone to be over this, to save the land. Pharaoh says, and who would be better than this interpreter? This is the man that knows it best. He appoints Joseph to be second in command over all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to the servants, Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Shepherd boy, slave, manager of Potiphar's house, thrown into a dungeon. And now he stands second only to Pharaoh. He is in a position to save his countrymen, to save his family, to save Israel. God has placed him here. He doesn't realize it at this point, but he is where he can save Israel. When Joseph's brothers saw their father was, All right. Everybody knows how the brothers came, how that Joseph went through hiding his identity from them, and that finally, after he realizes that they have changed, they're not the same men that put him in the pit, that their father didn't know that he was not dead, thought he was dead. All he had to go on was the bloody coat. Joseph revealed himself, and he welcomed them. And he said, come and stay in Egypt, and I will, care for you. And the plan of God, all of Jacob and Israel would come to Egypt. Joseph would instruct them to tell Pharaoh when he asks you what your occupation is, tell him you're shepherds, that you tend livestock. And the reason was the Egyptians thought that was a lowly occupation. And they would have nothing to do with those people that were shepherds or herders, which guaranteed a type of isolation from the Egyptian society for the Jews. They were also given the best land for that, which was Goshen, the land of Goshen, where they could handle all of the herds. And Pharaoh says, let them handle my animals as well. So basically they became a nation within Egypt, which later on, as they grew and over the 400 years they were there, we would see how that causes problems for them from the Egyptians. But this was all a part of a plan. This was a time, that 400 years, when they would grow, and the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham that he would have descendants and a nation come from him through Isaac would be fulfilled. Genesis 15:50. When Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers all went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we are your servants. Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid, I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. God used Joseph to save Israel. He had all of the things that he endured. He finally realized that God had used those things to bring him to that point. And he was grateful for the fact that he could do that. There's a lot of details in that story that we've skimmed over. And if you don't remember it that well, it's a good thing to read and follow up on. Any comments or questions on Joseph? All right, we've got a few minutes. Let's see if we can get Esther. Time of Esther was written in the time of the Jewish captivity, when kind of in between, where a great number of Jews had gone back and were working on the wall of Jerusalem and rebuilding it and the temple. They had started that, And a great number of Jews were still in Babylon or Persia. So Esther is still in Persia. Now, I made a mistake last week in rambling on about Esther and Ezra, but the way I remember those books is Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. And Esther was actually an orphan. And her Mordecai, I think he's either a cousin or he is an uncle. Uncle, okay. I know that, anyway, there's a relationship there. He adopts her to be his own daughter. So that's the relationship that we're looking at here. She is adopted daughter of Mordecai because her parents are dead. And they were relatives of Mordecai. Anyway, there comes a time while at this period of time where a man named Haman rises to power, and his whole goal is to destroy the Jewish nation. We'll look at some details here in just a minute. One of the strange things about Haman is he is supposedly a descendant of an Amalekite king. I think it was Agag. And Saul, as king, was supposed to wipe them out, kill them all. But he doesn't. He defies what God tells him. He keeps Agag alive. And then the descendants, we come, and Haman is one of those descendants. Again, it's a case where Saul, a king, defies what God tells him, and then down the road, generations, someone that wouldn't have existed if Saul had done what he was told, rises up and becomes a threat to Israel. The name of God is not mentioned anywhere in the book of Esther, and yet God's providence is seen through the whole book. Ahasuerus, that's the king of Persia at the time. Ahasuerus, after coming home from conquering all of Asia, throws a rowdy and expensive party that lasts 104 days. Esther 1 and 3. That in the third year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, and the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles, the princes of the provinces, being before him. A drunken Ahasuerus called for his wife, Queen Vashti, to parade in front of all those present so they could admire her beauty. Vashti refused to be made a spectacle. Excuse me. Esther 1 and 11. To bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. Vashti would be removed as queen as an example to all the women of the land. Esther 1:13 and 22. Virgin maidens from all over the kingdom will be brought before the king, and a new queen will be chosen. The first thing we see here is that the king is the king over all. 27 provinces, I think, would be from the Mediterranean to whatever far eastern land they control. The first step in Esther's journey is a place for her has to be found. By removal of the queen, Vashti, then there's an opening. No one realizes it. Esther has no idea. Mordecai has no idea of it. But in God's plan, there's a position now that Esther can move into and be in place when she's needed to overcome and save Israel. So they rounded up virgin maidens from all over the kingdom, and they brought them to the king, and they would be introduced to the king one at a time, and he would choose one to be his queen. The background, the background for Esther, so that we know the girl we're talking about, and Mordecai, Esther 2 and 7, Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was, when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haga, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Haga, the custodian of the women. Esther's made the new queen, 2 and 17. The king loved Esther more than all other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. At this time, Mordecai is sitting at the gates, and as he sits there, he overhears a plot to kill the king. And he tells Esther, who is now the queen, who warns the king of the plot. Well, all of that is written down in the Chronicles of the King, and will play an important part later as the story unfolds. Haman, he gains prominence with the king, and it's commanded that all should bow down and pay reverence to him, and all do except Mordecai. Mordecai refuses to pay reverence to Haman. And Haman then, because of that, decides he hates all Jews and will do what he has to kill them all. Which means that every Jew in every province of the land will be under the threat of death. He goes to the king, and he convinces the king that there's a people within his regions that are defying him and will not obey, and that they should be destroyed. And the king, not realizing Esther is a Jew, gives Haman freedom to do what he will. And a law and decree is passed that allows him to set a day when all of Persia will kill every Jew alive, man, woman, and child. They'll be destroyed, annihilated. When the decree goes out, all of the Jews are mourning and wondering what will happen. A destruction of the Jewish nation and the Jewish people means that the promises to Abraham will never be fulfilled. The Messiah will never come. So Mordecai appeals to Esther for help. He says, go and plead before the king. And Esther responds, how can I do that? Because anyone that appears before the king will be put to death if he has not called him. The only way you can survive going into the king without an invitation is if he holds his scepter toward you. Then you'll live. Okay. We're going to finish next week. Everybody doesn't get killed. So we'll start there next week and finish up with Esther. All right. And then we'll look at how God's providence plays out one more time. Thank you for your attention.